Right, so this video is sort of a prequel to the next one, though they were kind of done out of order. I was thinking about focusing on one medium, and I'm still not sure what it'll be, and I'll talk a bit more about that in the next video. But I was thinking about what colors I'd get if I were to go with anything other than acrylics, and even with acrylics, I think it would be helpful to have a limited palette to start out my paintings with, instead of my current one. My palette, as you'll see near the end, although it gives me a lot of colors and it's quite vibrant, it has its problems as well. Anyway, so this is kind of the only case where I think it's actually a good idea to have a cheap set with a lot of colors to experiment with. Ideally, it should have most of the earth colors and a cool and warm version of at least blue and red. As for what to use the set for once you're done, they come in handy when doing color studies, like just practicing live color matching, or testing out color schemes on thumbnails, experiments with mediums, and stuff like that where light fastness isn't really an issue. I'll be using this old watercolor set that I had that has most of the colors I was interested in, and a few acrylics. Now, this first palette is the one I used in the next video. I wanted to try painting with very earthy colors. The only color I didn't have anything close to was Indian red, so I made it and matched it as best as I could to what I saw on the internet. Next, we have the yellow ochre, and for the blue in the painting, I used phthalo blue. And although it doesn't say on the tube what shade it is, it looks like a green shade, phthalo blue. But I wanted to see what replacing it with a redder blue would do. I didn't have a phthalo blue red shade, so I used ultramarine instead. I also wanted to test multiple colors on the other wheels as well, but I didn't want to make twice as many color wheels. So instead, I've kind of squeezed them in there. Hopefully, it makes sense. I'm trying out a new lamp here, by the way, but it didn't work so well. So I've put up images of the scanned color wheels that I tried to match to what I saw in real life as much as possible. You can find those all on my blog with proper labels and better details and an explanation of each. Now, as you can see for this color set, because the phthalo blue leans towards green, you get this horrible kind of purple. As to why ultramarine isn't creating a nice purple either, that's partly to do with the dark Indian red, but you might have also noticed that I'm using a CMY color wheel, like I'm arranging the colors like that. I find that much more accurate to how colors actually mix than an RGB, I mean an RBY wheel, sorry. I'm not used to that. I don't really like that at all. It's not accurate. Now, when you use this wheel, you'll notice that yellow and red are actually very close to each other. You could have a very warm red and a very cool yellow, and you'd still get a decent orange. But blue, because it's so much farther away from red or yellow, if you're using just one blue, you're always going to have to make a sacrifice in either your greens or your purples. You could use a magenta as your red to sort of fix this problem, and make like have the colors spaced out on the wheel more, so you get nicer purples and nicer greens. But again, near the end, I'll talk about why I don't really like that. Right, so this next color wheel is your typical red, yellow, blue color wheel. And I've also added the two types of blue, as you can see. And like I talked about, the purple is still not that great. It's very dark, and you can only really see the purple undertone when you add a bit of white. And also, although it is quite a lot brighter than the other one, so when you compare the color wheels side by side, it is indeed a purple. But the problem is that you've got so many relatively brighter colors that that purple isn't going to come out. As you'll see in the next color wheel, you can sort of trick the eye sometimes, but it only works. It only works if the other colors are helping you to do that. And in this case, they aren't. So that purple is always going to seem really dull and muddy. When maybe if you throw it in another painting where the colors are duller, you're not going to see that. Now, I just wanted to mention briefly that if you're going to make a color wheel, I highly suggest that you don't just put the colors, mix the main colors, but also do an interior ring where you have white. This makes it a lot easier to determine whether a color has a bias, either towards warm or cool. And it helps to see when you get something that looks like black, as can be the case with the purples. You might not be able to see that it's really purple, but when you add white, you'll see that it does indeed have a purplish undertone to it. So there's not much else to that color wheel, so that's why it went by so fast. The next one is the Zorn palette, and this is one of the most common limited palettes. It's really nice for doing portraits, and that's why I was interested in it. I wanted to try with this one though, whether a regular yellow or a yellow ochre would be nicer to use. And now Zorn himself didn't actually always use this palette, but a lot of his paintings did, and then you can see sometimes he's added like dashes of colors, and I really like this idea. This palette is a great example of how good a limited palette can be. It really helps you understand what the color relationships are. So here we're using just a red, and his red, I believe, tended to be a sort of crimson, so more towards blue. But I'm using just a regular red, the yellow ochre, trying to test those out, and a black. And you'll notice that the black looks like blue. So as you add white, if you were to just get any black, like this is just Payne's gray, but any black by itself, if you add white to it and you make a black and white painting, it looks like black and white. You can't really tell whether it has a warm or cool bias unless you put it to another, like next to another black that's different. And what's going on here is even if this black doesn't have a particular bias by itself, next to such warm colors, it appears blue. And you can also see that the purple actually appears quite purple, even though it's just black and red. And that's just because relative to each other, they're kind of fooling your eye into thinking that. And this is also the case why sometimes too many bright colors look kind of wrong, because they're all competing for each other. And in this case, you've only got one bright color really, and that's red. And that's really good for portraits again, because you can get all those pinks and stuff. But he would have used a yellow ochre, so all the other colors were really subdued in comparison. So you've got this bright side of the color wheel and this very desaturated side. And I think this is something really important to understand if you want to understand color theory. Sometimes it's not about picking the brightest colors. You rarely want to have, for example, the three colors that fit color theory. Um, you rarely want to have all those saturated because they're just going to be competing for each other. Less is sometimes more, so that's why I really like this idea of starting out with maybe duller colors and only really adding color when you need it. So if you don't need it and you can manage to work the painting so it can trick the eye, the entire painting also gets this sort of um, togetherness from the colors. It really looks like they go together um, instead of kind of being mismatched and maybe too saturated. So that's one of the main reasons why a limited palette is really nice. On the other hand, getting a limited palette and those bright colors to go along with it when you need might be very expensive, especially if you get professional colors, which I highly recommend you do. But yeah, so if you're on a budget or you want to get quality colors, but you only have money for a few tubes, these are two palettes that will give you a really wide range of colors. And they're not 3-color, they're 4-color. And then you also need a white, and the black isn't really needed, but I think it's a really nice convenience to have. But you can mix black from these. Anyways, the first is a palette with two blues. So you have a cool blue and a warm blue. So like I talked about, you have that large gap between the blue and the red and the yellows. So what you do is you fill it with those two different blues, one for making greens and one for making purples. And something to also consider is that you can also use especially when doing landscapes. Sometimes you don't want a green that bright, so you can use the red or blue. In this case, I'm using ultramarine, but you can use that to get a duller green. So sometimes you don't always want that bright green. It's a good idea to maybe start with that muddy mix and then add color as necessary, just so that the painting kind of gets that look where all the colors seem to go together instead of everything being too saturated. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, why not buy a limited palette and then kind of expand on that with brighter colors? And the reason I wouldn't do this, I mean, it's up to you, but the reason I wouldn't do this and I don't regret having bought quite a saturated palette is that I can mix any color if I want. So if I want to try any sort of limited palette, I can just mix small batches of the color I want and try those out. The only reason maybe not to do this is maybe you're bad at mixing, but in that case I would recommend getting a cheap set first to really fool around with colors before you get more expensive paints. The other thing is that the more tubes of paint you have, and if you actually use them, the more tubes of paint there will be to replace if you're using them all equally. And then if you happen not to use some because you bought it and you ended up not using that color very much, then you kind of have a wasted tube there. So that's why I think these are a good place to start, especially when you're taking the dive into more professional colors. And lastly, this is my acrylic palette. These came in a 6-piece set from Golden. They have a lot of sets like this one. This one is just called 6 Professional Acrylics. It comes with titanium white, carbon black, Hansa yellow medium for the yellow, phthalo blue green shade for the blue, and it also has a phthalo green blue shade, but to be honest, you don't really need it. As you'll see and should be able to see from the scan, it can mix a pretty decent green without it. Now, you might have noticed that the purple is really great, even though we're using a green shade phthalo blue. And the reason for this, like I mentioned before, is that you can move your red to compensate for a blue like that. In this case, the set came with quinacridone magenta instead of red. Now, I don't regret buying it. I didn't have the money for much else. But like I said, a palette with such a wide range isn't always that great. I have to mix and subdue 99% of the colors I use, and sometimes it can take some time to match the color just right. Of course, this would be the case even with a limited palette as well. But it's sort of quicker in my opinion because your colors are so much duller. It's so much easier to mix your colors and also to remember your mixes with a limited palette. Here you might end up pushing a color one way or the other for quite a while before you arrive at what you want. And since acrylics dry so fast, that's not so great. Also, I find having to make red especially annoying. I almost never need anything leaning towards magenta. I almost always need pure red though. And the red is also quite a bit more subdued than regular red. It doesn't have a good pink undertone if you compare it to the other palette on this page. I don't personally find that a problem, but others might, especially if you're drawing flowers or something. So yeah, although I don't regret it, I'm definitely considering trying something else out if I'm going to switch to a different medium. So yeah, that's the end of this video. In the next one, I'll be painting with that first palette I talked about, and also discussing some of the mediums I'm considering and why. If you found the video helpful, please consider subscribing or following me on any of my social media sites. I also have a website, and if you want to support me, check out my Patreon.